Hello, please let me see your ticket stubs for the double-edged double bill. This week, let's ride the Carnival of Souls at Action Point. Each week, Adam Thomas and Thomas Mariani will come to the table to discuss the randomly selected yin and yang of a double feature. Then, both will pick them between 1 and 10 in order to seal their fates for the next episode. One will have 2 good movies, the other 2 bad ones. Let the chaos begin. I am Thomas Mariani, and to all who come to this happy place, welcome.
And I am Adam Thomas, and I did a cool show on MTV and a lot of good movies. I should not be a legitimate actor.
Your illustrious career of getting kicked in the nuts.
Oh, not even the main guy. There's another guy, but well, we'll get to that.
We'll get to all that. So, welcome everybody to the Double-Edged Double Bill, where if you're new, every week Adam and I talk about a double feature that we selected at the end of the previous episode, and we do it around a certain topic, and we decided this time, because Jurassic World Dominion's coming out, which we're not necessarily excited for that film.
Zero fucks. Yeah. Zero.
Right.
Like below zero. What is below zero?
Is it in Fahrenheit or Celsius in terms of fucks?
Oh, that's true. That's true. What continent? What continent are we at?
It's true. But, we decided we wanted to tie something at least into that particular release. And we're like, even though the Jurassic Park series has gone far off the park element of it, obviously given the title change that happened.
Sure.
We decided, as a fun experiment, to do amusement park films, which this could be either films based on amusement park attractions or that primarily feature amusement parks as a concept, which, there's a palpable idea for that in film, especially for me, as someone who, I grew up in Florida, so I went to a lot of theme parks, especially the Disney parks.
You're from Florida? That's never been talked about.
That's true. This is a secret, a new reveal. This late into the game. God. What a twist and turn.
I'm Irish, by the way.
All these new you have to go to the back issues for that. We're revealing this. We're revealing it here. When I was younger, I went to the theme parks a lot, and particularly my favorites when I was a kid were Universal Studios, and at the time it was called Disney MGM Studios. Before now it's Disney Hollywood Studios is the park. And I think looking back on it, that really helped shape sort of my interest in film, particularly on kind of behind the scenes way. Because, at that park, it was always, at that time, particularly, in the early 90s, it was so much more about, the magic of movies and how they're made, and we're on a backlot tour, and, we're in this set that's gonna, explode or whatever, or when I was especially younger, the big centerpiece ride at MGM was the Great Movie Ride, which is how I found out about classic movies like Casablanca, or Singing in the Rain, or The Wizard of Oz, stuff like that. So I think that really kicked off my interest in film.
Oh, sure. Well, being a Michigander, we don't really have any main theme parks out here, but stone's throw away in Ohio, there's Cedar Point, which is a big one, which is a great theme park. Mm-hmm. And then we also had Kings Island around here, things like that. But I also did take the trek down to Florida when I was a kid. And, I actually lived there for a little while, but not when I was a kid. I was living there drinking. But anyways, Florida at the time, we went to Disney World. We went to, Epcot, Magical Kingdom, all of it. And I always loved Epcot, of course, because I still like Epcot. Epcot's awesome. The coolest thing I think I've ever seen at an amusement park was the Indiana Jones stunt spectacular. It was fucking awesome. It was so cool. And that to me, I was like, oh, they can do this in real life? I was 6 years old. And I remember going through the Honey, I Shrunk the Kids exhibit that they used to have.
Yes.
And you could get on the ant and go through the tunnels and all that. I'm like, this is the coolest shit ever. I'm a huge sucker for theme parks.
Yeah, and that stuff, they always framed it as oh, this is the actual set, quote unquote. Right next to that Honey, I Shrunk the Kids thing was the Roger Rabbit warehouse, where you could go underneath the fucking the cement mixer and all that other shit. It was all there. And yeah, they really framed it. And even when I was a kid, I always thought theme parks just as an aesthetic. I thought it always like interested me with like the idea of big giant sets anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Like we talked about Dick Tracy on the show, that has the aesthetic of a theme park, especially of that like kind of era.
100%. One of my favorite things ever, favorite memory of an amusement park, is having a dance off with April O'Neil. Ninja Turtles. I'm like, she's so pretty, but I'm gonna smoke her ass. Like it was the coolest thing. It's such a cool way for like kids to just have this sense of wonderment and like the imagination that you could put into it. Like when I was a kid at Cedar Point, they had a whole section dedicated to the Berenstain Bears, and you could go in all their houses, and people would be in the dressed up in the suits, and I'm like, this is just like the books. Well, Disney's a huge conglomerate, weird thing now, but still awesome.
And to be fair, was at the time that we were younger. It was just
it kind of always has been. It's just gotten more powerful.
Right, yeah. But at the same time, I had a similar thing with like the Berenstain Bears thing. When I was a kid, it was Mickey's Toontown. We're just like, oh fuck, Mickey lives here? Oh shit. No, it's weird. It does feel kind of just like we're like invading his fucking house or whatever.
Me and Mickey and Goofy are going to play Texas Hold'em. I'm about to take every fucking dollar. Because that's how you were as a child.
Exactly, for sure.
A degenerate gambler.
Oh no, Mommy, Mickey's going to break my legs. You're goddamn right.
Right. You're goddamn right I am. Red slate, fuck you, pay me.
What are you doing in my house?
Jesus Christ, we've already gone off the rails.
Well, appropriate, given, of course, the theme
roller
park.
Coaster rails.
Right,
yeah,
exactly.
Sure.
Yeah, to segue right back into us covering two films. One of them is technically based on a theme park, an actual one, which we'll go into. And the other one is shot at a real theme park that was at the time abandoned and is still kind of like, we'll talk all about it. But our two features we picked at the end of our last episode were your bad pick of Action Point. And then the good pick that I had, which was Carnival of Souls. So let's go ahead and get into Action Point.
That looks fun.
Your mom ever tell you it's your old papa home on the greatest amusement parks of all time? Those days were different. There weren't so many rules. Your mom would come for the summer. Even back then, she was the voice of reason.
You're the lifeguard. Shouldn't we be facing the water?
Let God sort them out.
Suppose you probably heard you got some competition in town. They got roller coasters and a chairlift that actually works.
What this place needs is an excitement enema. We're gonna make this place fast and loose. Every ride, every attraction, no rules, no speed limits, just pure fun.
That sounds kind of dangerous.
Let's see what this baby can do.
So Action Point came out June 1st, 2018, from director Tim Kirkby, though this is much more of a vehicle for the star, which is Johnny Knoxville, who we have not talked about Mr. Knoxville that much on the show.
Why the fuck would we? I mean...
Like, the nature of our show, we cover a good and a bad movie, Adam. So we could actually cover a lot of his films. Like, well, he was in, like, what was that one movie, The Deuce is Wild, that you made us cover a while ago?
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Oh, he what? Oh, you're right.
It's a blink and you'll miss it. He's just, like, there for, like, a scene, but he's there. But
I saw that movie twice in the theater.
Right. Go back and listen to our, I believe it's a coming of age episode where we covered that. Very weird movie. But yeah, so Johnny Knoxville's the star, and with Johnny Knoxville, who's obviously most famous for Jackass, which he co-stars in this movie with Chris Pontius, who's one of the many people on the Jackass crew. And I think before we get into anything about this particular movie, despite our grousing maybe about Mr. Knoxville earlier, I think we're both pretty solid fans of Jackass.
Love it.
Yeah.
Absolutely love it. I was so just in love with Jackass that I went back and watched the CKY stuff, Viva La Bam, all that stuff. I soaked it up. Like, it was so funny because I'm looking at these guys who are these miscreants and these, sort of off-kilter losers, for lack of a better term, skater guys who are into fucking rap and rock and being idiots. And I'm like, oh, this is me. This is my friends, even though I never did any of the shit they did. But I'm like, oh, I'd love to hang out with these guys. And even to this day, like even with the recent release of Jackass 4, you're like, oh, I'd love to hang out with these guys.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, is that Knoxville was the one who kind of tried to branch out and become more of an actor, as we kind of hinted at earlier. Not very successful at it, necessarily.
No. No.
Well, and I think it's the trouble of like him and Pontius and a lot of those Jackass people, whenever they've acted, it's always feels so weird because like the whole point is that they have these personas that are totally of their own and they don't feel manufactured. And you love seeing that when like you watch a Jackass movie, half the fun is not in necessarily the big stunts, which are glorious to see, but in just these guys hanging out with each other and laughing about their insanity that they're just displaying. And it's charming in its own very crass white trash kind of way.
Absolutely. Nut shots to them is like the greatest joke in the world. And it's great. It's great. You love seeing them sit around and just these giant hands hitting each other or, airbags popping out anywhere and just the genuine glee they have. One of my favorite things ever is it even in Jackass 4 with all of, because I mean, as we said, we love them all, but when Steve was all fucked up and Johnny Knox was like, oh, you're still not going to lose that $1 million smile when he pulls his tooth out. It's so funny. It's so ridiculously funny.
Or even in like one of my favorite stunts is the in Jackass 3D where they have the thing set up in the lunchroom with the giant hand, which is
I love it.
Amazing.
Love it.
And like
where for some reason Aaron believes they want soup.
Right,
because it's so good.
Because what's so great is that like they're able to do like quick nut shots, which is always fun. After like a big stunt, everything pauses and then someone does like a quick nut shot. That's always great. But at the same time,
sure,
the big appeal is like, oh, how are they when they went from like the TV show to film? How extravagant are these fucking bizarre stunts gonna be, to the point of like the weird cartoonishness of a giant hand pushes a dude from the lunchroom and they get covered in soup.
Yeah. It's great. It's great. And the real fun of it is, how are these guys still like, you believe these things? Oh, they want soup and he goes for it. Like, obviously you're going to get fucked. Like, seriously. Oh, sit on this piano chair and play nothing's going to happen to you though. Nothing's going to happen to you. Like, well, come on. Obviously. Like, they're just so dumb. They're just but they're just having a great time. And that's the huge appeal. Like, there's just a bunch of people getting paid to just have fun and fuck with each other. It's great.
Right. So with Action Point, though, which I'm sorry we have to steer back to Action Point, what Knoxville and Pontius and everyone here tried to kind of do is take the Jackass sort of stunt stuff and put it into a feature narrative.
Yeah, like a scripted version.
Right, which they kind of experimented before with like Bad Grandpa, which was the spinoff that had mostly Knoxville doing silly stuff, and they kind of had the story intertwined, which, however sloppy that movie is, it at least does it better than Action Point does.
Well, yeah, because the point of that, which made it funny, is most people weren't in on the joke. It was just John Knoxville and the kid. So that kind of worked. This, however, I'm just going to go ahead and say it, get out of the way right now, is one of the worst fucking movies I've ever watched.
Yeah, because if you're unaware of this movie, which you probably are because it bombed horribly when it came out in 2018, this was a movie that basically involves Knoxville playing a guy named DC Carver, who is this dude who is running a theme park in the 80s. Most of this is told in flashback, as DC is like an old man talking to his granddaughter in a bunch of scenes that totally don't feel sliced in because, oh, let's appeal to the Bad Grandpa crowd with our much lesser makeup that wouldn't be nominated for an Oscar like Bad Grandpa.
Oh yeah, let's just take off the mustache and the beard.
Right. So DC is trying to run this park in the 80s called Action Point. That's kind of like the lesser Rand park in this town, and he ends up getting a lot of these young kids who he's employed to help him out with it, and also his friend Benny, who lives with him on the grounds in this former like Western attraction, and also his DC's daughter, who comes over to visit for the summer. And basically it's a like attempt to be an 80s era like snobs versus slobs thing, with them competing with the other park that's a lot more successful and everything. And the trouble is that it's kind of trying to do this traditional narrative and mix it up with a lot of these big stunt sequences that would appear in a Jackass movie. But because they want to like mix that up, when they do the actual stunts, they can be pretty impressive. Like, Knoxville apparently damaged himself more severely than any Jackass movie doing this movie. But the trouble is when you don't have that Jackass, like, oh, we're doing almost like cinema verite, we're documenting this from different angles, and then, like, Chris Pontius and the other guys will, like, come in and laugh, and it'll be, like, this big rousing thing. So many of the stunts just end with somebody writhing in pain, and it just feels kind of like a bummer, and it's not funny.
At all. I think you described it very well. They're really trying to be, like, the underdog versus the rich guy. Think of, like, Ski School, or movies like that, and take all of the humor out of it, because that's the thing about this movie. It's supposed to be a comedy. I didn't laugh once. There was not one chuckle. It feels very sophomoric from people who should be doing better, and it does one of the things that I hate the most about films when they know it's bad. It has a constant score.
It's either like some song that exists or the really bad score that's written for the movie, whichever.
100%. It's not funny. Nobody's likable. I will say the one who plays the young version of the daughter is probably the best in the movie. And there's some pretty cool little character actors in this. Like, you got the one who played Ted's daughter in Bill and Ted, the newest one.
Bridget Lundy Payne is their name.
Oh, right. Yeah, Johnny Pemberton, who's really good, usually. Fucking mind-blowingly, you got fucking Mike Schultz or whatever his fucking name is. Matt Schultz. It doesn't matter. Nobody cares what his name is. But Vince from Fast and the Furious,
right? Yes,
is in this.
And one of my favorite sort of like fun stuffed shirt types, Dan Bacadol, who plays the Gregory, the guy who runs the villain theme park. And all that. Yeah,
a lot of good character actors. The only thing is, like, look, Johnny Knoxville is not a good actor. Hot take. But as bad as Johnny Knoxville is, Chris Pontius is so much worse.
Yeah, because at least, like, Knoxville can deliver lines as opposed to Pontius.
Yes.
There's always this awkwardness, because the fun of Pontius on Jackass is he's the super confident, brash guy who has absolutely no qualms about doing anything.
Showing his wiener.
Right.
Just pulls his wiener out all the time.
Right.
Great, funny.
The funniest bits of Pontius really are, like, in Jackass 2, one of my favorite bits, when he drinks the horse semen, and he just flat says, like, I'm ashamed of myself. Like, without missing a beat, just as I'm ashamed.
That's what I can't watch. I can't watch that. I can't watch that bit. It makes me gag. But yeah, but that's the thing about Pontius. He's so funny. Like, dude, Party Boy was the shit. Mm-hmm. It was so funny. But in this, where they're just like, oh no, literally, it's like, oh, just be Pontius from Wild Boys, and he can't do it.
Well, it's not even that. I think they're trying to put him into more of, like, oh, be the specific, like, the Bluto archetype that was in these 80s movies. Where it's like, oh, you're the wild man who does all this wacky stuff. And it's just, like, Pontius's other, like, usual approach is more like this boyish, like, oh, I'm being a little stinker energy. As opposed to this, where he's trying to be much more like the Bluto, where, like, it's not even like little stinker. It's just like, I'm a wild animal man. And it's just like, I don't believe it out of him. When he's being fed lines, it just feels like it's like a kid who's being fed lines, like, for like some fucking, like, cameo in a movie. Like, oh, are you the director's little kid?
Mikey likes it. Like, he feels like the Chex kid.
Right.
Like, it's not good. It's terrible. It's terrible.
Yeah, and even, like, with Knoxville, what I love about Knoxville on the show is, like, he feels less like an actual actor in Jackass and more of, like, a ringmaster. He's just coming in, he's introducing you, obviously, like the, hi, I'm Johnny Knoxville, welcome to Jackass, and all this other stuff. And here, he's trying to be, like, the underdog, sort of the Bill Murray type, and it just feels like it's too much to put onto him to be that, to have any actual kind of, like, character arc or anything to it. And you can tell, really, like, the best bits and pieces of the movie are, like, in the outtakes, where you see him just being Johnny Knoxville, and, like, laughing at the absurdity of what's happening.
100%.
Like, the 100%. Best, when the best part of your movie is the outtakes, you know, like, it is a severe problem.
Oh, it's a mess. It's a big mess. Yeah, like him jumping over the crocodile. Hilarious. But in film, like, when they're gathering the animals and the porcupine and the squirrels in Pontius shorts, stuff like, this is so phony. We've seen these guys do this stuff for real, like, just be idiots. But in this, when it's so staged and so scripted, it's unenjoyable.
The comparison between Tim Kirkby, who had directed, like, other comedic stuff, mostly television before this, versus a Jeff Tremaine, who directed all those Jackass movies, is Tremaine knows it's not about, like, oh, we have to, like, get a bit of coverage and awkwardly edit everything. He's like, I'm gonna have 2 different cameras, and then I'm just gonna, like, let this play out as much as possible without like that many edits to
Right.
it.
What we get is what we get. We'll make it work.
Right.
It's it feels very renegade filmmaking, to where it feels artificial sort of renegade filmmaking.
Right, and even like with Tremaine, like he's able to do like clever things. Like I remember in Jackass 3D, there's the stunt where like they go on the jet ski and they do it up the ramp, and there's the camera on like the steering wheel of the jet ski. Like that's like actual clever, like cool stunt filming styles, as opposed to here it's like a wide shot and then maybe like a close up. And then the moment you have like the other actors come in and be like, "Oh, are you okay? Oh, are you hurt or whatever?" It's like you said, it feels like really phony.
Which is really a shame that the fact that Knoxville got injured the most on this, because the thing is, we've all seen him put his body through so much shit in those Jackass movies and shows. But in this, it's like the biggest example I think of is him going down like the tube slide on the cart. Mm-hmm. You see him going, and it's reaction, and then all of a sudden hops the thing and lands. You don't even stick with it. You don't even get to see like, oh shit, he's going out of control. You don't even get any of that. You just see him go down the luge and then crash.
Right. It's like we have the choppy sort of journey, and then the punchline is told in like a stagnant shot of just like him falling, and we once again hold too long and him being like, oh god,
way
like,
too long.
The appeal would be like in a Jackass movie, like everyone crowds around him, everyone makes sure he's okay, and then they laugh. Like one of the best examples of that is in the first Jackass movie with the golf cart. Where like that turns over, and you're like, there's tension, and you're like, oh my god, is he gonna get out of it? And then he gets out of it, and they're like, oh man, we can laugh about this now, but I almost fucking died. That was a lot, as opposed to just like seeing a man writhe on the ground with nobody there to help him until like once again, like all the actors are cut to like them crowding around him. It just feels so much more unpleasant.
Right, and it's sad, and that's the thing about the outtakes, where you see him do the luge thing and he lands, and then in the outtakes you see everybody crowd around him and he gets up and throws a thumbs up and everybody claps and stuff. That should, like, let's see that in the movie. So you'd be like, oh, he's okay. No, you literally linger on him, this man laying in the ground, breathing in the dirt, where the dirt is creating a cloud above him because he can't breathe, just moaning in pain. Like, that's not funny. That's not good. I don't want to see that.
Yeah, and to what we were saying earlier, like he basically suffered like amongst several injuries, 4 concussions, a broken hand, a damaged meniscus, whiplash, stitches. He lost some of his teeth, and during that alpine slide sequence you're talking about, when he lands, like shortly after that night, and he like sneezed and his eye popped out of his socket.
Twice.
Yep.
Twice.
Yes.
That's terrifying.
Right, and you can
that is terrible.
And there are certain shots where he even said, like, the last few days of filming, they couldn't film certain sides of my face, and you can tell.
You could see it right in the beginning. Actually, right in the beginning, when it shows young Johnny Knoxville, you tell his eye is fucked up.
Like, he looks so bad in this movie, way worse than he has in any Jackass movie.
You look at him at Jackass 4 as this silver fox who's still in great shape. You're like, oh my god, he looks amazing. And then you see him in this, you're like, oh no.
Yeah. And we should also talk about, in reference also to those actual injuries, this is based on a short documentary called The Most Insane Theme Park Ever. That documents the actual park, which was called Action Park, that was in Vernon, New Jersey. That basically throughout the 70s and into the mid-90s was this park that was infamous for having like these incredibly dangerous rides. And a lot of people got injured, and even 6 people ended up dying at the park.
Jesus.
Right, yeah. The short documentary I've heard is good. I watched the Class Action Park, which is on HBO Max, the like feature.
That's the one I watched. Yeah, that's the one I watched.
Right,
yeah.
and that documentary is also fascinating because they want to try and mix up the like legend around that town of just like, oh my god, Action Park. It's like a rite of passage. You have to go there and you have to survive Action Park. But then also near the end, they go into like and 6 people died, and they interview actual like family members, people who died. It's really fucked up. So it's even weirder when you get to this movie that's kind of based on it.
And making it silly.
Right, making this, like we mentioned, like a sort of Animal House style snobs versus slobs movie. Just like, yeah, this is gonna be fun. Why can't we keep this incredibly dangerous park around? Come on, you're just trying to keep us down, man.
This bear likes to drink beer.
Right.
You're like, oh, this is hilarious.
Right, and especially when, like, there's a whole thing with the villain of the park makes his son go down the alpine slide and get injured purposefully. Feels like in real poor taste considering one of the actual deaths was on the alpine slide with, like, a young man who, like, died in real life.
Yeah, awful.
Yeah.
Awful. But hey, Johnny Knoxville's in it, so it's wacky.
Yeah, and I guess the question is, Adam, as a sort of like theme park movie, do you think they do at all a good job with like depicting like this crazy park as like a fun thing, or like what do you think of like that element of it?
I think they definitely tried to make it seem like, oh man, you could just do whatever you want. You could have beers and push, structures over and just really just kind of go for it. At no point watching this movie was like, I'd like to go there. I'm like, oh, that sounds terrible. This whole thing sounds atrocious. Like, no, there's nothing about this movie that is enjoyable. There's nothing about the theme park aspect that is exciting. I just think it's just a piss poor attempt to make a Hollywood style Jackass movie. And unfortunately, use a source material that real people were hurt and killed in.
Yeah. And like they legally try and distinguish, but like, no, we're Action Point. The other
We're action. We're Action Point. Action Point. We're gonna go see The Clash just so we can firmly tell you what time period this is in.
Right? Didn't you feel like so bummed out about he forgot about The Clash?
I gave 0 fucks.
Yeah, and also the lesson about like we mentioned it earlier, but the old man inserts are like, even with this very bad movie, they are the worst parts of it.
So bad. Yeah,
really bad old age makeup, and another stunt where like Knoxville in the old age makeup tries to go on like the swing set thing, and then he falls over. Mm-hmm. Impressive stunt, but also we hold so long on Knoxville, especially as this old man in that scenario. It's just like, yeah, this isn't fun. This is like old guys like on the ground. There's no even like bad grandpa style, like everyone crowding around him once again, or him getting up just like, I'm fine, whatever. Not really much of that either.
Not at all. And I hate to say this, but the fake out ending where he's walking away and fakes a heart attack and falls, and like the daughter comes out, stop, and he's like, I almost got you. I almost wish that it wasn't fake. So like, wow, that would have been daring and dark and different. No, you just get another Jackass stupid thing.
Yeah, it was such a bizarre way to end the movie on like that particular joke.
So bizarre. I hate this movie, man.
Yeah, it's one of like definitely we've talked many times about the worst kind of bad movie to watch is a bad comedy. This definitely fits that bill.
And it's what, an hour 27 minutes, hour.
Well, to be fair, like the movie is so barely padded out with like the old man stuff feels like it's definitely trying to pad because like the credits hit like 66 minutes, so it's even barely like over an hour.
And I mean, this movie feels like it's 3 hours long, easily. I paused it for every fucking excuse I could. Oh, I heard a noise. It's only me by myself in the apartment. I heard a noise. Better go inspect. Like, it's just, oh my God. This movie, whew.
Yeah, I think we both firmly recommend, instead of watching this, watch any of the Jackass things, especially even Jackass 4.5. Recently came out on Netflix.
Which I have not watched yet.
It's very fun. It's very interesting, especially considering it's about, like, since the 4.5, there's a bit more of a documentary aspect to them talking about shooting it during COVID, which is fascinating as well. So yeah, I definitely recommend, like, watching that or any of the Jackass things that would be on Paramount Plus instead of this.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. But, Adam, it's time we get to our good feature here, Carnival of Souls.
Action you've never seen races across your screen as you thrill to a new dimension in picture making. Carnival of Souls. This is the shocking story of a who crawled from the river to race through a nightmare, walking a tightrope between heaven and hell. From the unreal, she crashes through to reality. She is a girl driven mad by the relentless forces of the beyond. He will not relent as he comes for her again and again. Carnival of Souls arouses such emotion that the management has been forced to state positively no refunds. Carnival of Souls is the shocker of all time, guaranteed to sweep you into a new dimension of picture making. You can't afford to miss Carnival of Souls.
So Carnival of Souls came out September 26, 1962, from director Herk Harvey, his first and only feature film. Herk Harvey, before this and after this, was a guy who made industrial and educational films in Kansas. So basically any of those film strips that you either saw in school or more likely you saw somebody parody in like an 80s movie onward of like the old film strips. He made those. Like, here are some of the titles of some of his film strip films. Street Safety is Your Problem.
Yes.
A Citizen Makes a Decision. Pork, The Meal with a Squeal.
What? Wait. Okay. Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Shake Hands with Danger.
Oh, yeah.
And Take a Letter, ... from A to Z.
That's amazing. Yeah, it's totally one of little Billy didn't want to go to bed that night, but he didn't want to tell his parents why. You know?
Right, yeah, so that's what...
So good.
That was his bread and butter for the Centron Corporation. And while he was working, he was traveling around America, and he was passing through Utah when in Salt Lake City he ran to the Saltair Pavilion, which is this actual pavilion that still exists to some degree down there in Salt Lake City. That's this, at the end of a pier, it's this giant sort of like glorious amusement park location that at that time had been abandoned for quite a few years and had some remnants of a carnival affair, which gave Harvey the idea to make a movie called Carnival of Souls, which is about this woman, Mary, who is a church organist who at the beginning of the film survives a horrible car crash that ends up with her car going into the water, and she decides to leave that town and become a church organist in a new city. And when she moves over there, she starts seeing these weird visions of this mysterious man who is only referred to as the Man in this weird ghoulish makeup. And she starts to unravel, as it were, as this very short film goes along. Another movie that is only about like 75 minutes long. It's very short, Carnival of Souls.
Oh, super short.
Right, and this is a movie that came out in 1962, initially to no real reaction. Obviously, Herk Harvey didn't really have a film career after this and went back to doing educational films, but it gained a real cult following as it went into the public domain and ended up playing in like revival houses and especially on television a lot. And it's a fascinating little movie that I pick as my good pick. But Adam, what about you? What are your opinions on Carnival of Souls?
Well, to be fully transparent, the first time, and probably I've seen this movie probably like 4 times, maybe 5, but the first couple times I watched it as a Riff Tracks movie. Those guys covered it, and even then, I was like, "Oh, this is funny." Because of their banter, but I'm like, this movie's kind of fucking scary. Like, it's spooky. It's unnerving. So going back and watching it without the track and everything like that, I watch it and I'm like, oh, this is really, really good. Like, the cinematography in this is amazing. The editing is amazing. The score is amazing. I mean, there are so many fucking cool things they do in this movie that are way ahead of their times. Like the idea of, they're dealing with PTSD and maybe like, is there psychedelics involved? Like they're dealing with the sexual explosion of the 60s. Like it's a really kind of smart movie.
Yeah, and I think it's fascinating because it has a surreal quality that I think could only come from somebody who made like those industrial educational movies. Like, when you watch those movies, there is some sort of note of not quite reality to them. As you're seeing, like, you made fun of it earlier, but like, little Billy's walking down the street when he knows there's, a stranger down the road. What are you going to do, Billy? Like, there's a weird surrealness to any of those strips, if you ever see them.
You're doing that voice from now on this show. That is your voice now.
Hello, welcome to the Double-Edged Double Bill.
What are you going to do there, Adam? Are you going to accept the ice cream?
but that is clearly present here. Even like as much as you make fun of that voice, like the psychiatrist guy she goes to at a certain point, like she literally runs into and she talks to in his office, has that voice. And just like, well, haven't you ever thinking about being more social and going out with people and stuff like that? Like, there's a weird kind of lack of reality to parts of this movie that I could see why it could be potentially a good like Riff Tracks movie, but also makes it a very unsettling horror movie that doesn't fit into our natural reality.
I feel this movie got like sort of sidelined, because it came out right around the same time like Night of the Living Dead and all that stuff, and it's just kind of considered the cult classic, which of course Night of the Living Dead is, but I think Night of the Living Dead is a lot more championed as sort of a superior film, but to me, this feels like a very good companion piece to those early to late '60s black and white horror films. I don't think this movie gets enough credit as it deserves at all. The thing is, it's not cheesy. Like, I would never call this movie cheesy. Some of the performances might be a little, silly or whatever. Like, even the guy you were talking about, the psychiatrist, like, what do you think about that? Like, yeah, of course it's silly, but at the same time, like, it's a genuinely unnerving film.
Yeah, there's definitely an amateurishness. I think that's what's really here. Like, this is definitely not like a super professional production. It's a very independent movie. But I think in the same way that, like, with Night of the Living Dead, when you watch that movie, it's like, well, this is clearly from somebody who hasn't had a lot of experience making movies, but at the same time, like, that sort of independent spirit is what gets you invested to, like, make these weird things because, like, you don't have a lot of money. Like, this movie cost $33,000 in 1962 when they filmed it, and like, it's so cheap that literally they got like that pavilion set, they were able to do it for like $50 a night is how much it costs for them to like rent out that pavilion, basically, to be able to
Pretty
use
dope.
it. Right.
That's
And
pretty good.
and to get to like the actual theme park aesthetic of it, when they go down to that pavilion, I think like a lot of movies have tried to capture the idea of like, oh, an abandoned amusement park and going in and seeing what kind of monsters are there. This is like it feels like the origin point of the scary abandoned amusement park with all the imagery that's there, and especially of like the actual man and his other ghouls like dancing at the pavilion, and how it's like just slightly sped up in a way that's unnerving, and how like the main character kind of like goes in and out of being a part of the ghoul group as she's looking at them. Like, that's all so unsettling, and I think really works, especially when you've seen earlier her walk around the abandoned amusement park and see stuff like the mattress that comes down the slide suddenly in midday and shit like that, just like immediately puts her on edge. Like, all that stuff beautifully captures like what I think a lot of other films kind of have tried to crib with the abandoned amusement park aesthetic.
This movie is so brilliantly shot too. Just even the sort of color play and light play that they use in this, it's so, like, I don't want to say ethereal, but
I mean,
for
it's
lack of a better
accurate.
term,
Ethereal, like, it's very accurate.
ethereal. Yeah, it's super ethereal. Yeah, I said that. That was me. Um, it's a very unnerving, weird little movie. It's set up in the way where you almost got like the Hitchcockian feel to it, especially with the look of the lead. And then it also digs into, is this delusions like of her mind, or is she imagining what she wants? Like, there's so much to explore in this film. Like, this thing, it might be a low budget and this weird early '60s, but he's really trying to say a lot in this movie. It's not just this creepy little horror movie, but he's, in my opinion, it's kind of like a sort of an answer to what's going on at the time in the '60s. Like I said, with the psychedelics, the sexual explosion, the war in Vietnam, everything. Like, this movie has a lot to say that I don't think he gets enough credit for.
Well, I think it predates some of those things. This is '62, so this is even like a bit more.
But it was on the cusp. MK Ultra was already happening with the psychedelics and all that. Like, it's there. It's on the cusp of all of it. Like, an explosion is about to happen. And I think this movie might be an answer to it.
Right. I think that's true. And I think what also, like, at least the interpretation I kind of came from, especially after this watch, is that it feels like it's a woman who is constantly being put down by authority, whether it be like, the creepy dude from down the hall at the place that she lives, or her tenant who completely, or her landlord who completely dismisses any of her cries about like, oh, there's a man here or whatever, even the psychiatrist who quote unquote tries to help her and it's just like, oh, you just need to be more social or whatever. Like, it's all about this woman who doesn't want to be alone, but kind of has to be because everyone shuts her out or doesn't really trust what her actual opinion is. And when she is able to, like, kind of like break down and reveal this like element of herself, be vulnerable, everyone just is like, oh, fuck off. Like, the guy down the hall just like, I should get stuck with you crazy or whatever, and then leaves. And even like the scenes where she's like walking around on the street and they have like the weird little like almost flashback wave effect that happens and nobody like pays attention to her, nobody says anything to her, it's like she doesn't exist in this world. That stuff is like genuinely unnerving because it's shot in this guerrilla style where you're like up close and personal with her and you're in a similar state of just like, oh, somebody acknowledge this woman, somebody help her, somebody do something, and nobody's doing anything at all. And then the cinematography works for that because they literally shot a bunch of that stuff like guerrilla style where they did not have permits. The only place they really had a permit for was the pavilion. Like, unless it was a 4-border set, and if they're like out there on the street, they had to quickly shoot them and get the fuck out. And you feel that kind of like nervous tension along with like the filmmakers.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And by the way, too, for an early 60s movie, a very, flawed, sure, but a very strong female lead. Like, you really kind of do sympathize with her. She's more of a fleshed out character than you got a lot of times at this era.
Right. Yeah, it feels like, even, in comparison to A Night of the Living Dead, classic movie, I would say this main character is a bit more developed than like a Barbara.
A bit more? Jesus Christ. Barbara goes catatonic 10 minutes in, and then that's it. That's her character.
Right. As opposed to Mary, you get more of a sense of like, oh, she has a bit of a confidence earlier where she's like, I'm leaving this town. I'm never coming back. I'm getting the hell out of here. I'm going to be a big church organist. And then her gradual like descent into madness is a real tragedy to see because she had so much confidence and so much of assuredness about herself, was getting out of her life. And then, oh no, turns out everything's falling apart around you because no one will listen to your genuine cries.
Well, when your career goal is to be a big church organist, you might have to take a step back and reevaluate.
I don't know. I mean, look, it helped Gene Moore, actual Kansas City church organist, who composed this score you love so much, Adam.
Oh, well then, fuck me, I guess.
Yeah. Boom. Roasted. Anyway.
Mic drop.
But do you think a Herk Harvey, despite this movie kind of failing, like, do you think he could have made another interesting movie? Do you wish we got more out of him? Or do you feel like this is kind of like the one image we could really get out of Harvey's, like the brief interruption of his like educational film career path?
The thing is, by the way, great name, Herk Harvey. I mean, what an amazing name.
Mm-hmm.
But Herk Harvey reminds me almost like a Browning with Freaks, where, obviously he did Dracula, which is a classic, sure. And he comes out with Freaks, which is just this crazy, weird movie that, like, what the fuck is this? Especially for the time period. And I kind of feel like Carnival of Souls is almost the same thing, to where, yeah, they're appreciated now, but I almost get why he didn't get anything else afterwards, because they're so sort of ahead of their time or just off kilter or bizarre. To where, granted, I would have loved to see more work from him. I think we could have got some more weird, crazy psychological movies, but at the same time, I'm kind of glad this is the one we got. At least his legacy didn't go long enough to get ruined.
Right. Yeah. And even also shout out to him as the actual man, the ghoul, is one of the more underrated, like, terrifying horror movie monsters, I would say. Particularly like when him and the other ghouls like come out of the water.
Oh, it's creepy.
Yeah.
Terrifying.
Yeah. Or even just like the big shots, like as much as it could be like a cliche of just like, oh, it's a bunch of like ghouls running around chasing her. Like the shot where she gets on the bus and they're like loaded in the bus and they get out.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great.
But yeah, I kind of agree that like even Todd Browning, to be fair, had a larger career path than he did. Because he'd also done, like even before Dracula, he'd done stuff like the London After Midnight, the Lost film starring Lon Chaney, which I would still, I hope at some point that's just found in some fucker's garage.
But can you say that's a huge career point because it's a lost film?
Well, no, I mean, it was like popular at the time. Like he's made plenty of other movies that were just like lost to time. Like that's more like an issue of like preservation of film as opposed to if it was popular or not at the time. Because there are plenty of like other lost films that were big hits that just don't survive because of bad film preservation.
Sure. Well, I know Freaks did hurt him though.
Right, no, that's the thing. It did hurt him, definitely. He didn't make much after that point. But he still at least got to make multiple feature films, as opposed to Herk Harvey. Didn't quite get that. But yeah, I do kind of agree that it's interesting just to have this as like a one-off for this guy that, like I said, mostly made these like weird, small educational strip movies. But that kind of like feeds into the legend, where you're like, oh, this guy only did like dumb film strip stuff. But then he was able to do this one weird horror movie that shows like his talents with doing that kind of film strip stuff, but also has this like weird surreal edge that would influence so many other horror films after this point. Like long before I ever saw this movie, I heard the name Carnival of Souls mentioned several times on like very underrated or great like horror films of like this particular era.
Oh no, it definitely has its status as a, well, I don't want to call it a cult classic, because I would consider like Night of the Living Dead, Reanimator, all these ones like cult classics where they're so popular. Carnival of Souls, I think, is appreciated by a very small niche of people. I don't know that it's as celebrated as all of those, which is unfortunate because I think it should be. But it's just like I said, a really underappreciated, underwatched film.
Yeah, but you see so much of its influence, like even from not just even Night of the Living Dead, but all the way down to like there's so much David Lynch in this movie. You can tell this was definitely a movie of Lynch's like childhood.
Oh, dude, ton of David Lynch, ton of Stephen King. It's not as defined as maybe some of those people were, or as sort of fine tuned, but it's all over the place. Like you can absolutely see where a lot of people really enjoy this movie who are big now and have used it as influence. Absolutely.
Well, and plus, like we mentioned Night of the Living Dead constantly, that's another movie where it went to the public domain very quickly, and this it was able to be like shown everywhere. Like basically, you could watch this movie completely legally on YouTube right now if you have not seen it. And,
1,000%.
Yeah,
any streaming service that exists, almost, it's there.
Yeah, and you'd definitely be able to watch it. But let's just go into final thoughts then on Carnival of Souls, and particularly for the sort of creepy amusement park aesthetic, how that works for you.
I think it works 100%. I mean, it does it so well. Everything is so unnerving about this movie. This movie constantly, well, not constantly, not maybe right off the get, which, by the way, right off the get is great. I mean, there's a drag race happening. You have no idea why. Mm-hmm. Very cool. Once the crash happens and sort of she washes up on the shore and all that, it kind of just gives you this sense of uneasiness. Like, what is even happening in this movie? Is she dead? Is like, what is this? And it doesn't let up for the entire screen time. It's a very creepy, weird little movie. And for that, I love it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's just this very fascinating artifact of the early 60s that, like you mentioned, has traces of elements that kind of work it from that specific time, that specific era, but also these other themes that like really carry forward. And you can get so much of it just because it is this weird, surreal movie that has influenced so many other movies. So you can kind of see like as interesting as an origin point, but also feels like something that could only be particularly made at that specific time, like 1962. And it has like all the charms and even some of like the foibles with it only help accentuate a lot of the weird, fascinating elements of it that make it a real like great gem. So great a gem, Adam. It's a part of the Criterion collection.
Yeah, of course it is. Yeah, sure.
I wish I could have written the essay for that booklet.
Yeah, I put on 7 Samurai and then watched Carnival of Souls.
The longest one and the shortest one. Well, now, Adam, let's get to our weekly segment, The Double Redo. Double Redo.
Double Redo. Double Redo. Double Redo. Double Redo. Double Redo.
That works. So the Double Redo is a segment where every week Adam and I, in celebration of the topic, bring up a couple other films, one that we recommend and one that we don't, that fit within this particular atmosphere. And in this case, with amusement park films, I and Adam have, a good and a bad pick to talk about. So I'll start with first, my good pick is one that I think has, a lot of similarities to Carnival of Souls and was from a director who made one of the movies you mentioned a lot during that discussion, George A. Romero. It is sort of a weird tie-in in terms of it's less a feature film and more of like a small little industrial film that he made for money in 1973, I believe, called The Amusement Park, which was lost for a while, but then ended up getting found recently and put on Shudder. And basically, it's the story of this old man who goes out into an amusement park where he is constantly ignored. It's trying to be sort of like a little movie about elder care and elder abuse, but it's really unnerving, really unsettling, has a lot of that George A. Romero charm to it because he took Lee Simon, like, make a sort of industrial film about respecting your elders, and he turned it into a psychological horror movie about just like being an old man and being around young people who don't give a shit about you. And it's really unsettling. It is shot in an actual amusement park, and he takes advantage of the space so beautifully. And it's not obviously like top tier A Romero, but I'm glad it was discovered and can be viewed by anybody, because it's definitely a very interesting little piece of film history. And then the bad one I have is another one that was shot at an amusement park, but in secret, which was the big hype around Escape from Tomorrow, which is basically this movie that is about like a family who goes to Disney World or Land. They shot at both locations and they kind of mix it up together. But it's mainly focusing on the dad who hates the wife in the family and is annoyed by his kids and is trying to escape off to have adventures in some very unsettling situations. And the whole hype around this movie was the director, Randy Moore, had filmed this guerrilla style in both parks. And that was like the big hype at Sundance, where it's like, it's a movie that, you know, Disney wouldn't want us to show. It's like this movie that you can't believe exists. You can't believe it escaped from tomorrow. And I was so hyped, so fascinating to see it. And it's a really bad independent movie that kind of feels like it's a parody of what independent movies are for like people who don't like basically like small indie movies. And I totally get it, because this is like so bad. It just has like some really terrible performances, really bad like use of some of the guerrilla style thing. You can admire some of that where it's like, oh wow, they got this shot from like this side of the Magic Kingdom or whatever. That's kind of fascinating, but it all just amounts to a really underwhelming, boring horror movie that has like attempts to do like weird psychological like imagery, and tries to really say something about like, oh man, you are all a sheep for going to Disney World and Disneyland, and it fucked up what these parks do to people. It's like there's something you could do about that, but this is not it. This is just like a really bland, very repetitive, very stale thing that only has the interesting factor of like, oh, we shot it at actual Disneyland. It's like, oh great, you got anything else? No, they don't. It's really fucking terrible.
See, I haven't gotten the chance yet. Well, I've probably had the chance, but I haven't watched the Romero amusement park one. I really want to. I was super excited when I heard about it. Just one of those things where I have a very, I know it sounds crazy, but I have a very emotional sort of connection to George Romero, to where I'm like, oh, I don't know if I want to go back to it. I don't know. I'm going to eventually watch it. I just got to see it, but I'm glad that it came out, and then kind of, universally people love it. Not necessarily love it, but appreciate it. It has been critically panned. People are like, oh no, it's good. So that's exciting to me, and I'll definitely will go to it. But as far as your bad one, that I fucking hate that movie so much. I went into it the same way, where I'm like, oh, this is going to be something really creepy and weird and cool, and the way they did it. Oh my God, the movie nobody wants you to see. And it's just terrible. It's terrible. It's not even like, obviously it's guerrilla filmed, so you can't expect great cinematography, but it looks terrible. The acting's terrible. It's just a bullshit movie. It's one of those movies that relies on the gimmick of what they did without having any meat on the bone. It's a terrible film.
Well, and I love also all that hype is around like, oh my God, is Disney gonna like shut down the Sundance premiere, or what's gonna happen? Is Disney gonna respond? And Disney wisely decided to like not pull a Streisand effect and was just like, what? Who? We don't care.
Yeah, no, go ahead, watch it. It sucks.
Yeah, and rightly, they were like, oh, well, I guess it's appeared from existence and no one cared.
Yeah, it 100% did. So for my good pick, I have, the one that I guess is expected. It's the most obvious, but for a reason. It's one of the best. I have the original Jurassic Park. There's nothing about that movie that doesn't still hold up. It's to me the best blockbuster of the 90s. It is just a phenomenal film. Still to this day, it's exciting. It's thrilling. I showed it to my kid, and I saw the wonderment in her eyes that I had the first time I saw it. You're like, oh my God, dinosaurs are real. This is all real. Oh, well, dinosaurs were real, but dinosaurs are real in this movie. Like, it's super exciting. Jeff Goldblum rocks the shit. Sam Neill's amazing. Laura Dern's great. It's just, Mr. DNA. It's a great movie. It is the epitome of a blockbuster film, and it works on every level. It's thrilling, it's funny, it's sexy because of Jeff Goldblum. It's just everything's there. It just every level that movie exceeds. For my bad, I have one that the main crux of the movie is an amusement park thing, and it's a horror franchise that is very hit and miss, but I have Final Destination 3. The thing about Final Destination 3 is their biggest gimmick was the DVD. It wasn't even the film in theaters, where the DVD came out and they're like, oh, you could choose your own like adventure and who dies. And it's just such a huge bust. It's a terrible, terrible, non-exciting horror film where they really, really were trying to milk what the first two did. Second one, I'd say better than the first, but it's just everybody's unlikable. That's the thing about these movies. You want to care about some of the kids or really hate some of them, so you get excited or when something happens to them. And everybody in Final Destination 3 is like bland milk dose. Like you don't care.
Well, I mean, there's not a lot else to say about Jurassic Park. Yeah, it's great, it's amazing. But even just like as a theme park nerd, going back to it, like I love the way that they implement certain like sort of like Disney Imagineering elements to it. Like I love particularly the whole thing with John Hammond going up to the little ride that's like the like go around carousel of progress, and he's talking to the other version of himself, and he's like, oh, I forgot my lines, hold on, let me pull it up. Like stuff like that's really fun. Yeah, it like the main appeal, and even with like as bad as like first Jurassic World was necessarily, the biggest asset that movie had was like, oh, they did a really great job of making what would be a modern theme park version of Jurassic Park with like the fucking
The corporate tie-ins.
Oh yeah,
The corporate tie-ins.
particularly the Jimmy Buffett tie-in with literal Jimmy
great,
Buffett
great.
and everything else.
Yep.
Yeah, like there's fun elements like that. But yeah, Jurassic Park originated a lot of that and did it so well with that. But then with Final Destination 3, I agree that it's not necessarily my favorite of the Final Destination movies. But I would say it's like a lot more fun than say like the worst one of those is 4. Like 4 is like an
4 is the worst. Yeah, 4 is the worst.
Dire, awful movie versus like I agree that like the characters are a lot more sort of like archetypal in a way that isn't as fun as like in 2 in particular. I think has one of the best groups of characters, or 5 I think does a much more stellar job with kind of like getting you excited or kind of like peeved off about some of the asshole characters there. But if nothing else, 3 has a lot of fun stunts to it, which is always the appeal. Like, oh, the kill sequences, like the sequence in the tanning bed, I think is fun. The actual opening like sequence of the roller coaster is pretty wild. There's a lot of like I think fun elements that like keep that movie at least watchable to me. But I agree, it's not. I think it would like sit firmly like in the middle of those movies in terms of quality.
All right.
Well, let's go ahead and do our repeat our titles here for anybody who might not have heard. I have my good was The Amusement Park, and my bad was Escape from Tomorrow.
My good is Jurassic Park, and my bad is Final Destination 3.
Yes, and submit your own double redo choices to us at some of the socials and stuff that we'll detail as we get to the end of the show. And we do our picking for next week. Stay tuned for that to find out what we're covering in the next episode. But in the meantime, we want to thank some people like Chris Oliver for the intro and outro music for our show. Listen to more of his music at chrisoliver.bandcamp.com. Thanks to Kristen Thor Lally for our artwork. Follow him at Night of Water, that's night with a K, _of_water, for all of his great stuff. On various different platforms, like on Twitter and his Linktree, where you'll be able to find him. And then, of course, thanks to our Patreon supporters, patreon.com/DEDVpod, where for just $1 a month, you all get to vote for topics we do, or even particular films we cover. And you'll be able to do that this week if you contribute that $1. And if you're an existing patron, you'll be able to vote for Adam's 2 good picks, because he has the good picks for upcoming 2022 catch-up episode, where, you know, in the middle of every year and at the end of every year, we talk about movies that have come out in the individual year that we're recording in. And so Adam has 2 choices for you to vote between. Adam, what are the 2 choices that you want people to vote on?
Yeah, and you know what the thing is, both of the picks are things I haven't watched yet, but I've heard nothing but good things, and I'm kind of like stoked on both. I have the movie that went straight to Hulu, Sebastian Stan, Fresh, which I heard it's great. Sounds awesome. I know a lot of people have seen it, Thomas being one of them, who said it's great.
And you're not really aware of like the premise of that one, right?
I have zero idea
Okay.
other than I think there's cannibalism involved. And I could probably be 100% wrong, which is fine. And if I'm right, great too. And then the other one is the Michael Bay, Jake Gyllenhaal, I've recently become a fan of, Ambulance.
Yes, I've seen both of your movies, and I would be totally excited to talk about either of them. Fresh is a fun little movie that especially has a lot of twists and turns that are pretty enjoyable, and one of the better Sebastian Stan performances recently. And Ambulance is fucking wild. It's Michael Bay being able to especially film with drones, which is fascinating.
That's exciting.
Right, yeah, a lot of fun there. Definitely one of the better Bays in quite a bit. But yeah, so Fresh and Ambulance, you all get to vote for that. And whichever one you patrons pick at patreon.com/GEDBpod will end up being the individual movie we cover, one of the two. But for more of our antics, follow us on Twitter and Facebook at DEDBpod. And you can submit feedback either there or at our email address, doubleedgedoublebill@gmail.com, all spelled out. And you can find me on Twitter and letterboxes at NotTheWho'sTommy. I also do some writing at marianithomas.wordpress.com and at film-cred.com, which, just a little shout out. I've referenced this before earlier this year that I'm a producer on a show called Film Cred Review, which is on the Film Cred Patreon. People who contribute $1 over to them, our friends at Film Cred, will be able to listen to that. And we recently relaunched the podcast with a new host, which is Hayal Peralta, who's been a guest on our show. And I was the first guest for her reign on the show, where we talked about the idea of summer blockbusters and some recent film news. So listen to that over there.
You can find me on Instagram at Atom or Adam. That's ATOM _ OR _ ADAM. Or you can find me on Facebook under my name. If you want to send me a friend request, say you know me from the show, I will accept it. I'm always down for a conversation. Or you can follow me on Letterboxd at Schwanson. That's SCHWANDTSON.
And if you want to hear more of us, please, follow us on places like Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and other podcasting platforms out there. If you're listening on Talk Film Society, why not listen to all the other great shows out there on the network? And you can also dig into our archives and our Podbean main feed for several episodes we did even before we joined Talk Film Society.
Several is an understatement, by the way.
Most of the episodes that we've done.
Yeah. Several is a huge understatement. Hundreds of thousands of hours.
Yes. And for, if you want to help us out and you can't support us on the Patreon monetarily, that's totally cool. Money can be tight. But the completely free way to help us out is to rate, review, or simply share the show around, because it gets us more visibility.
Yeah, dude. I mean, honestly, anything you do, like hit us up in the email, hit us up on, iTunes, Podbean, whatever. Like, just give us a rating. We'll take it. Rafe, fuck you.
Well, now, Adam, we're near the end of the episode, and it's time that we did our picking for next week. Basically, if you're new out there, Adam and I each, at the end of every episode, pick a good and a bad feature. One of us has 2 good choices, one of us has 2 bad, and usually each of us assigns them between 1 and 10, and that gets us our good and our bad feature that we pick after the other person just randomly assigns them between 1 and 10. But there are certain things to mention here, like 1, the Godfather rule, where Adam and I each have a single veto we were given a few weeks ago to use if we hear a choice after we pick it between 1 and 10. We end up getting a certain choice, and we're like, you know what? I actually want to cover this. I will take the cannoli, and thus we use that veto up. We only have 1 chance of that every year, and we have to use it by next May. And, when we do that, we have to go with whatever alternate choice is there, though there is one exemption for vetoes, and that's when our patrons, like we mentioned, patreon.com/GEDBpod, vote for certain choices we do. In this case, for next time, we're doing Pixar in honor of Lightyear coming out.
Oh, yeah, the one everybody's so stoked about.
Yeah, as someone who grew up like Buzz and Woody were friends to a young Thomas, I could not give less of a shit about fucking Lightyear.
Yeah, no, that's crazy, because they definitely did have a friend in you. And now it's just...
I needed that so much. I'm so upset that's also their return to theaters after so long.
I agree.
Especially given how good Turning Red
Right, that's
was.
exactly what I was going to say. God damn it.
Much better movie. But,
Much
or
better.
or even Luca.
Soul.
Right, well, Soul I get because that was going to come out, like, pre-vaccine. Like, I get that. Not coming out in theaters.
But yeah, Luca, Encanto.
Or Turning Red would have been much... Well,
Encanto wasn't Pixar.
Fired for that one.
Semantics.
It's like they're both from one separate, one singular corporate overlord or anything. But yeah, so we're doing Pixar again. We haven't done that since, a couple, almost like 3 years ago, I think. We did the one about, where we did Up, and we did The Good Dinosaur. But we figured it was time to revisit, because, we're both fans of Pixar animation in general. There's a lot to talk about. Adam, you cannot use your veto for my bad choice, because our patrons ended up voting in a poll for that, and so it's exempt from being vetoed, and they have the choice between Cars 2, which we both anticipated would be the winner. We both figured that would be the most likely one.
1,000%. 1,000%.
Because it has the most infamous reputation and everything, but our patrons ended up going with my alternate choice for the bad one, which was Brave. But now, Adam, for your two good choices, embarrassment of riches here. Very curious where this will go. I'm going to go with the number of Toy Stories 4.
At number 4, I have Toy Story 4.
Wow.
Yeah, man. 100%. I personally, that's probably my favorite of the franchise, believe it or not. I love Toy Story 4.
That's interesting. Wow. Okay. I won't take the canoling on that. I really enjoy that one quite a bit. So we'll talk about Toy Story 4 then. But what was your alternate choice, Adam?
At number 9, I had good old-fashioned Ratatouille.
Ah, Ratatouille. Of course, yes. One that I feel like, it's not as marketable. And it wasn't as big a hit. But I think it deserves a lot more love.
I completely agree. Yeah, I completely agree.
Wonderful little movie. Yes. So yeah, Toy Story 4 and Brave will be covered next time. Interestingly, Toy Story 4, a movie we could have covered for this particular episode, given all the carnival stuff.
Oh yeah, we absolutely could have.
Yeah.
But again, my favorite Pixar movie. I'm going to cry.
Well,
I'll be talking about it.
Right. We'll talk about it for sure. But that's for next time, Adam. Until then, let's go off to that mysterious pavilion at the end there. There's a bunch of ghouls dancing. I'm sure we'll fit right in.
I know I fucking will. I have a body of a troll.